Most people think they know the story of Annabelle, but there's one detail that was never meant to be public. Not about her, but about another doll that investigators quietly refused to display because they couldn't explain what it did to the people who owned it. And unlike Annabelle, this one was never locked behind glass. In fact, for years, it sat in a normal home in a quiet American neighborhood with nothing but a wooden chair between it and the people it seemed to be watching. What made it worse wasn't how it looked. It wasn't stitched like a rag doll or dressed to resemble a child. It looked ordinary, almost forgettable, the kind of object you'd pass by in a thrift store without a second thought. And maybe that's why no one took it seriously at first. Because when something doesn't look threatening, you don't question it. You live with it. You trust it. And sometimes you let it get too close. Before we get into what actually happened, there's something worth saying up front. If you enjoy real-life horror deep dives like this, the kind that sits somewhere between documented fact and uncomfortable possibility, make sure you resubscribed so you don't miss what's coming next. Because stories like this don't usually end the way you expect. Now, most people grew up hearing about cursed objects. Movies turned them into something theatrical. A possessed doll, a haunted toy, something obviously wrong. But real cases don't announce themselves like that. They start small, quiet, easy to dismiss. This one began in the early 1990s. A couple, Daniel and Rebecca, had just moved into their first home together. Nothing unusual, a modest place, just outside a mid-sized town. Quiet street, friendly neighbors, the kind of area where nothing really happens. Rebecca found the doll at a yard sale about 3 weeks after they moved in. She almost didn't buy it. She later told a friend that what caught her attention wasn't the doll itself but the woman selling it. The seller seemed eager, not pushy in a sales kind of way, but in a way that felt like she needed the doll gone, like said didn't want to touch it any longer than necessary. Rebecca laughed it off at the time. People project weird emotions onto objects all the time. There was nothing unusual about that. So she bought it. $5. No story attached, no warning. At first, nothing happened. The doll sat on a chair in the guest room. Days passed, then weeks. It became part of the background. Just another object in a house, still being unpacked. Until Daniel noticed something small. One evening, he came home from work and found the doll sitting differently than he remembered. Not dramatically, just slightly turned, as if it had shifted its position. He mentioned it casually. Rebecca shrugged it off. She assumed he just hadn't noticed the angle before. That kind of thing happens more often than people admit. Memory fills in gaps. Details blur. But then it happened again. And this time, it wasn't subtle. The doll had been facing the window that morning. When Rebecca went to check on something in the guest room later that afternoon, it was facing the door. Directly. As if it had been watching the hallway. That's when the feeling started. Not fear. Exactly. Not yet. Just a quiet sense that something wasn't right. They did what most people would do. They looked for explanations. Drafts. Uneven flooring. The possibility that one of them had moved it without remembering. They even joked about it over dinner. But the jokes didn't last long, because the changes became harder to explain. Objects in the room started shifting. Small things at first. A book moved from one side of the chair to the other. A picture frame turned slightly off-center. Once, the door was found closed when they were sure it had been left open. Still, nothing they could prove. Nothing they could show someone else and say, look, this isn't normal. And that's what made it worse. Because doubt has a way of isolating you. Daniel started taking photos before leaving for work. Just quick snapshots of the room. The chair. The doll. The surrounding objects. He wanted to catch anything that would confirm what they were seeing. At first, the photos showed nothing. Then one day, they did. The doll had moved, not dramatically. Not like something out of a movie, but enough that the difference was undeniable when compared side by side. Rebecca didn't speak for a long time after seeing it. Because once you have proof, even small proof, the question changes. It's no longer did this happen, it becomes, How is this happening? And that's when the situation began to escalate. Rebecca started having trouble sleeping. She told Daniel she felt like she was being watched. Not all the time, just at certain moments. Usually when the house was quiet, late at night, early morning, there was one detail she didn't tell him right away. You remember the house? The quiet hallway, and that guest room where everything first started. Nothing about this is new. This is exactly where things stopped making sense. The first time it happened, she thought she heard movement in the guest room. Soft, subtle, like fabric shifting against wood. She assumed it was the house settling, but then she heard it again. And this time, it sounded closer. She got out of bed, walked down the hallway, and stopped just before reaching the guest room door, because something about the silence on the other side felt wrong. Not empty. Occupied. She didn't open the door that night. The next morning, the doll was no longer on the chair. It was on the floor, facing the doorway, as if it had been waiting. At this point, Daniel started taking things more seriously. He set up a simple camera in the room. Nothing advanced, just enough to record overnight. He wanted to catch whatever was happening. The first few nights showed nothing. Then, on the fourth night, something changed. The footage wasn't clear. It wasn't dramatic. But there was a moment, just a few seconds, where the image seemed to distort slightly, like static interference. And when the frame stabilized, the doll's position had changed. No visible movement, no transition, just different. That's when they stopped sleeping in the house. They stayed with a friend for a few nights. And during that time, something unexpected happened. The friend's house, completely separate, miles away, started experiencing small disturbances. Nothing major, just objects being misplaced. Doors slightly ajar. A feeling described later as unsettling but impossible to explain. They hadn't brought the doll with them. It was still sitting in the guest room, or at least, it was supposed to be. When they returned, the front door was unlocked. Nothing inside appeared stolen. But the doll was no longer in the guest room. It was in the hallway, closer to the bedroom. And that's when fear finally replaced doubt, because up until that moment, everything could be explained away. Coincidence? Stress? Misremembered details, but this felt intentional, deliberate, directed. They decided to get rid of it. Simple solution. Right? Remove the object. End the problem. Daniel took the doll, placed it in a box, and drove it to a landfill on the edge of town. He didn't tell Rebecca exactly where he put it, just in case. Oh, he wanted it gone. Completely. That night, for the first time in weeks, the house felt normal. Quiet. Still. Rebecca slept through the night. No sounds. No movement. No feeling of being watched. And for a moment, it seemed like it was over, until the next morning, when Rebecca walked into the guest room and saw the chair. And sitting on it was the doll, exactly where it had been before. Same position, same angle, facing the door. Daniel insisted it wasn't possible. He knew where he had taken it. He knew what he had done. There was no logical way for it to be back in the house. But logic wasn't helping anymore. At this point, they reached out for help. Not paranormal investigators, not anything like that. They contacted a local psychologist, because what scared them most wasn't the doll itself. It was the possibility that something was happening to them. Shared delusion. Stress-induced hallucination. Something internal, not external. The psychologist listened, took notes, asked questions, and then said something that neither of them expected. He didn't dismiss their experience, but he also didn't confirm it. This is the same case, the same house, the same doll, Daniel locked away in the garage. Nothing has changed except what they're about to realize next. Instead, he suggested documenting everything. Every detail, every change, every feeling. Because sometimes patterns reveal things that isolated moments don't. So they did. For weeks, and what they documented wasn't just movement. It was timing, patterns, moments when activity increased, moments when it stopped, and slowly, something unsettling became clear. The changes seemed to happen when attention was directed toward the doll. When they focused on it, observed it, tracked it, almost like it needed awareness. And when they stopped paying attention, everything went quiet. That realization changed everything, because it introduced a question that neither of them wanted to ask out loud. What if the doll wasn't the source? What if it was just the focus? A trigger, a center point for something else. Something psychological. Something that grows. The more you think about it, the more you watch it, the more you believe it. They decided to run one final test. They moved the doll into a sealed container, placed it in the garage, and made a decision not to check on it, not to talk about it, not to think about it. Days passed, then weeks, and nothing happened. No movement, no disturbances, no feeling of being watched. The house returned to normal. Eventually, they moved. New place, new start. The doll was left behind, still sealed, still untouched. And here's where the story usually ends, with relief, with distance, with the assumption that whatever happened stayed there. But years later, during a follow-up interview, Rebecca said something that changed how people looked at the entire case. She admitted that sometimes, even now, she still feels it. Not in the same way, not as strong, but occasionally, in quiet moments, she gets the same feeling she had back then. That subtle awareness, like something is just outside her field of vision, watching, waiting. And the worst part, there's no doll anymore, which raises a question most people don't like to sit with. What if objects like that aren't the cause? What if they're just the starting point? And if that's true, then getting rid of them doesn't actually solve anything. It just removes the thing you can see. If you've ever watched horror movies growing up, especially ones about dolls, and this to someone who did too, because chances are, they've never heard this version of a haunted story before. And I want to know what you think. Do you believe something like this can be explained psychologically? Or do you think there's something else happening? Something we don't fully understand yet? Because cases like this don't leave you with answers. They leave you with questions. And sometimes, that's worse.